The story begins with a storm and tempest in the sky. A giant bolt of lightning strikes down, and it is all the attack of a man whose blow splits the earth and throws people around. The sounds of thunder subside, and we learn of the Fist King, the man who subdued Jianghu with nothing more than his bare fists. He is now more often referred to by that title than by his real name, Dan Wusong. In front of him lies a defeated opponent. Dan looks up at the man, his eyes full of irritation. Suddenly he feels a sharp pain, and a huge bloody wound appears in his stomach, which he holds with his hand. He explains that he was attacked by some mysterious group, and he was able to take out almost everyone, except for the last two warriors, who were watching him from above the cliff. He notices a detail. Both warriors look very sophisticated and rich, and wonders where they came from. Ready to get it over with, he kicks one of the enemies right in the direction of the two. As the poor guy flies towards them, he asks the sword demon to help him. But the sword demon himself reaches for the hilt, abruptly chopping his warrior in half. Wow, that's pretty brutal. And the two pieces of meat fall to the ground beneath the rock. Wusun says how the demon did it without the slightest hesitation, so he's used to hitting unfairly, even on his allies, and notices a tag on his sword that says blood. Wusun recognizes it, saying that along with such cruelty, this symbol means only one thing. He realizes they're from the demon clan. The demon swordsman jumps down, saying he is very impressed. After all, if he could last this long, he deserves his title. Dan tells him to shut up, because he'll kill him in just 10 blows. The demon swordsman exposes his blade, calling him a very insolent man. Then he makes a sudden dash, swinging around, sword releasing purple waves. His first blow explodes, but Wusun dives under it. Charging his arm for a counterattack, he instantly shortens the distance and hits the demon swordsman in the chest with his lightning bolt, surprising him. He drops his sword and starts coughing up blood. Dan, on the other hand, is already preparing to deliver his decisive blow and immediately goes on the attack. The second blow was already full of lightning energy, even more painful. The next turn was a flurry of 6 blows. He notices an oddity. His blows miss the vital points. It's the 9th blow in a row. But he says it's like someone's holding him back. We see a purple thread of energy around his arm. Another man is pulling on it, but Wusun doesn't realize when he's made him his puppet. In the moment of his distraction, the swordsman demon grabs his blade, and with all his might stabs Dan in the chest with his katana. He starts coughing up blood, clutching the blade in his chest. The demon swordsman declares with a smile that King Fist's reign ends here. But instead his eyes fill with wonder. When the purple threads of aura are cut off by Dan's brute force, that's how strong he is. The demon clenches his teeth and tries to cover himself with his hand. Striking directly towards the swordsman demon, it causes a massive explosion. When the dust settles, the demon swordsman is almost unharmed, just a scratch on his cheek, and starts laughing in relief, saying that Wusun is a real monster in battle. All around we see the havoc that one Fist King managed to make, who was struck down by blood loss. The demon is angry at his ally and talks about how he could have easily died, then starts poking Wusun in the head, saying that if he's going to die, let him do it somewhere else. But he gets an unexpected uppercut. He thought Dan was dead, and Wusun says it was his 10th punch. The guy next to him starts laughing, and the swordsman demon turns red with embarrassment. Dan's eyes close. Wusun says his power is waning, so that's the end of it for him. But he regrets a little that he didn't finish the demon with the last blow. He died at the hands of the demon clan, and we see a giant blue lightning discharge striking the courtyard. We are transported to a manor on Mount Juhua. There, a woman stands by the bedside and says that it was just horror. Wusung slowly opens his eyes. He's confused when she asks him if he's all right. Dan doesn't realize where he is and wonders if he has been healed. He looks around and sees some beautiful walls and a jug with a flower on it, as well as some rugs or paper on a table. Dan sits down on the bed, and at first his eyes go dark, but he comes to Norma, and then notices he has no wounds. The girl next to him offers water. Wusun accepts, but wonders why she calls him the first young master. As he sips his tea, he catches a glimpse of a mirror, but he doesn't recognize his own face, pale, skinny, and those long hairs. He spits out his drink in a fountain and a rainbow, and then tries to rip off his face, thinking it's a mask. But looking closely, he finds no stitch in the neck, so it's not a mask. As he continues his torture, the girl sees this, and running off, she says she'll be back soon with the doctor. Dan even slaps himself and then slaps himself again, not realizing what's going on here. The girl at the door notices that he's extremely strange today. In the room, Woosin thinks that demons couldn't have done this. They would have just taken over Jong-hoo. But he wonders whose face it is. What kind of person is that? He realizes he has to get up and figure it out, and notices the king on the table. Dan gets up slowly, can't take 2 steps. He says his body doesn't obey, like he's a little deer. He manages to reach a chair and grabs the book Yonha Trading Group. He says he's heard the name before. It's a big trading group near Juhua Mountain. Although he's far from the merchants, the name is familiar to him, and the recipient of the letters is the owner of his body. The owner of this body is the eldest son of Lee Jin-young. All the letters are addressed to him, some asking him to borrow money, others calling him to gamble, and there's even one from a woman asking him to have sex with her. Dana is infuriated by what he's learned from the letters. Woosin says the owner of the body is an alcoholic or some other marginalized person, and this event is not witchcraft or a mask, and he doesn't sense anything strange about this body. Dan concludes that somehow he's been reborn into it. He sighs and admits that he's gone crazy. Suddenly, someone bursts into the room and calls out to him, and he quickly runs into the room, and then stops with a funny pose. It's Gunsun Myung, his personal physician. Woo-sung wrinkles his nose, wondering what kind of freak he is. Gunsun says he's been informed of the weirdness and has been worried sick to his stomach. He starts to take his pulse, but Woo-sung pulls away, saying there's no need to worry. Gunsun is happy about this and tells him that he's made him his favorite meal. They bring chicken soup, which is great for strengthening the body. So says the mad doctor. But Woo-sung calls him a bastard because it's good for a healthy person, but poison for someone so weak and sick. He must have checked his pulse because he was alarmed by his good condition. Dan finds out that Gunsun is acting like a snake. He says that with a good appetite, Woo-sung will be able to participate in the Dragon and Phoenix fighting tournament. Woo-sung wonders how many years this competition has been going on. Gunsun replies that it's about 200. Dan agrees and asks to keep the soup, but he has no appetite. He chases Gunsun away, saying he wants to sleep. Closing the door, he sighs, noting that if the 200th Phoenix Dragon competition is approaching already, it hasn't been long since he died, which was for the best. After all, the demon faction is still alive too, and he'll be able to kill them. And that snake-like doctor is a lot of people who deserve to die. And this time, Dan convinces them they don't have to worry. Now he's going to try to kill them all in one fell swoop. The scene moves forward in time, and some of the maids are surprised. Their master, who usually eats only gruel, is now insanely hungry and practicing regularly. He opens the door, and we see a half-naked Dan, all wet and tired. He wonders if the girl made him breakfast. Then he runs to the table, dressing, and orders to prepare from this day only simple breakfast. All the servants of the house notice that the gentleman now looks much healthier. His attending physician then knocks on the door, and Dan heads to breakfast. The maids look at him, seeing that he is not happy, and don't know whether to let the doctor in. Dan tells them to let him in, and the maid quickly complies with the request. The boy notices how presumptuous the doctor is for coming to kill him again. The doctor smiles and addresses the gentleman politely. This only infuriates him. It's unclear why the fellow is trying to please. He grins and says he wants to catch that rat. Dan asks what the doctor wants, and the doctor shudders in embarrassment. He excuses himself that he came because he's lonely. He hasn't heard from him in a while. Then the doctor notices how healthy Dan looks and says that his treatment was pointless. Dan wonders what he means by that. And then he asks, does he mean the attempted poisoning with Dragon Phoenix soup? Gong-sun is surprised and says there's a misunderstanding. It's a nutritious tonic food. And Dan says he thought it was poison. Gong-sun gets worried and reminds him that he's his personal physician, and if he's not welcome here, he'll leave. As he's leaving, Dan calls out to him. He's come uninvited and now he's leaving without permission. Does he even realize who's the boss? The doctor is shocked. He feels that he is about to collapse. Dan laughs and says he's joking. Gong-sun laughs nervously in response. The guy orders some writing utensils. He needs to write a letter. Dan says he'll dictate now and let Gong-sun write. He declares that he'll be staying in the villa for a long time due to a serious illness. Since his life is stubbornly going on, he wants advice on what to do next. Gong-sun freezes, and Dan asks why he doesn't write. Gong-sun grins and asks what's going on here. And then the wands fly by him, and Dan orders him to speak. The sticks pierce the wall behind his neck. The doctor feels his neck bleeding, and Dan declares that he's not the Lee Jin-young he remembers. Gong-sun panics and asks what that means. Dan finally calms down a bit and begins to explain. For ordinary people, soup is a healing tonic. But for a weak patient like him, it's definitely poison. And he as a doctor knows that for sure. He asks if the doctor really thought that as long as he was worried. Dan wouldn't notice him checking his pulse. And what's more important is that GH noticed it right away. As soon as he refused the soup because he had no appetite, the doctor's posture and attitude changed immediately, and things didn't go according to plan. Gongsun couldn't hide his murderous intent and anger. Dan is sure that he didn't act alone, and demands to write down the names of those who gave him orders. Gongsun wonders why he's doing this, and why he suspects such a good man. The doctor sighs and covers his eyes with his hand. But Dan stares at him without averting his gaze. Gongsun immediately stops pretending. He says he didn't expect a man as mean as Jin Young to have a conscience. The doctor says he was just trying to send him off with dignity and calls himself a fool. Gunsun looks back at the maids and thinks he'll have to kill them too. At that moment, the doctor pulls out a hidden needle. Suddenly, Dan strikes his skull with a brush. He starts spitting up blood, and Dan tells him not to do anything stupid. One just has to listen when Jin Young addresses him. Dan notices that his arm hurts. Because his body is too weak, so he needs to regain his strength soon. Once he's stronger, it won't matter if Younga's entire group is against him. They won't be able to stand up to him. Back in the group, he will thoroughly investigate Gongsun's case. He feels a sharp pain and falls back against the table. Dan doesn't realize where the headache came from. He hears someone's call. He starts having visions. First of the doctor. Then he sees them meeting just before, and realizes it's the memories of the previous owner of Jin Young's body flooding into his mind. Tears stream down his face. He says he understands now. The drops fall not on the floor, but into the body of water. It reflects the house of Lee Jin Young, the eldest son of a wealthy family. And as the eldest son of a merchant family, he wasn't as smart as the second brother, not as strong as the third. He was just an unfortunate son who didn't have enough of everything. Jin Young tried to make up for his shortcomings with money, but ended up wallowing in debauchery and foolish pleasures. When he realized his mistakes and looked back, it was too late to change. He was sent to this villa because, if memory serves, the main family didn't care for the place. The problem was that he was reborn without the memories of others. But now he can focus on martial arts full-time. Dan doesn't believe that such a magnificent body was wasted. With his knowledge, he will quickly reach a high level. He notices something else, and looking at all his money, he realized there's nothing he can't buy for his health. He looks at Gongsun's corpse and says that he should be buried. The scene changes to a beautiful mountain landscape with cherry blossoms blooming. The seasons change one after another. Autumn comes and the manor maid sweeps up the fallen leaves. Then winter covers the whole palace with snow. And then spring comes. A whole year has passed. Someone is walking through the courtyard. A man enters the gate, sees the servant girls, and says he has a letter for the young master. It's one of the guards of the Yonha trading group named Mok Inseop. The maid informs him that the young master is practicing in the courtyard over there. Inseop looks at him in shock. The master has been seen meditating. And now Mok can't believe it's the same master he remembers. The scene changes to a narration on behalf of the GG. He explains that a couple seasons have passed. During this period, his energy core manifested. He engraved into this body all the martial arts necessary for survival. This is the art of enlightened mobility, the enlightened body art, the technique of swift stride, also the art that allows him to control lightning, the 10-phase white lightning art. He is currently in the 4th phase. Everything has been going smoothly so far. Now he's meditating. But suddenly he pushes himself off the ground, leans his arms in flight, and kicks a falling leaf, which at first appears to be completely whole. And then it shatters into 4 pieces, but it's not enough for him. He says it's not fast enough or strong enough for his level. Insop calls out to him, introduces himself and tells him his position and that he's from the security squad, and says he came to him with a letter from the main clan. Dan orders the letter to be delivered. Insop still can't believe his eyes as he remembers him as a baby who only drinks and whines. Dan asks him not to keep waiting, for his arm is already hurting, and moving into the room begins to read the letter. The letter reveals that his father has fainted and is bedridden, but the cause of the illness is unclear. Dan is already looking for a catch in this. Insop says he thinks he knows why. The Ouyang clan is to blame for all of this. He says that they paid them tribute under the pretense of protection and that the payments have grown to exorbitant amounts. Dan asks if they deserve the increased fees. Insop flatly denies it, calling them dogs. Even when the lesser deity sect tried to impose wild trade taxes, the Ouyang clan claimed they'd only meet with the main Yongha clan for serious business, but they never did. But their guard captain couldn't object because it was Ouyang Hu. Dan nods. He's heard that name. The clan is famous in Zhonghu, so since he's so powerful, it means the merchants are under his wing. Dan asks, so if he deals with them, the problem is solved. Insoup is surprised at this solution, but adds that there is another reason for his father's downfall. There was a sword fight between two of his brothers, and after his father saw their fight, he felt sick. Dan wonders if it was out of anger. Insoup confirms that's exactly what happened. Dan can't believe they fought in front of his father, and with swords. Insoup tries to reassure him, but Dan waves him off. He can't just sit by and watch all of this. He says to keep the letter, stands up and looks down at Insoup, and then says he'll go and solve the problem himself. Next, the scene switches. Insoup tells the guard that the master has changed. He says that Jin Young has become a true martial artist and has gained a great body. The others look at each other and then burst out laughing, not understanding how they can talk about this talentless loser like that. They joke that he must have become a champion bed wrestler, and one of them adds that then he is now a legendary sheet warrior. Insoup is advised that if they are already making jokes, they should make them more skillfully, such as that the vice captain has a mistress would be more believable. And at that moment, a man appears behind them and asks if the young gentleman has finally regained his health. We are introduced to Vice Captain Han Yap. With his hand, he has already taken and chastised the very red-haired joker. Han Yap says that Dan has always had great physical abilities and asks Insoup when he'll be back. Insoup says he doesn't know, but then someone yells out that he's already here. Insoup points in that direction. The guards say it's time to greet him, but one of them refuses to get up for the slacker. Han Yap reminds them of who pays their wages and silences the disgruntled man. As they approach the main building, Dan looks around and whispers that this is crazy. Young's trade group actually has the means to do something like this. Jin Young wasn't just born into wealth. He had a silver spoon in his mouth. He orders the two maids to take him to his father's house and rest themselves. As he walks, he thinks and doesn't understand something at all. Why on earth no one is greeting him? Suddenly, he hears a lot of footsteps, turns around and hears a voice. A host of guards draw their swords and run towards him to meet their lord in triumph. Seeing the guards greeting him with cheers for his safe return, Dan rejoices. Han Yap greets him with a bow among the many fighters. He says the lord has become almost unrecognizable, but rejoices to see him healthy. Another guard wonders if this hurts Vice Captain Han Yap's pride, because Dan was always violent, looking down on others, acted like a bad man. He even beat the Vice Captain, but he still treated him with courtesy and respect. And that now he was going to be made fun of again. Dan folds his arms and remarks that such a reception is not a bad welcome for an old bully, and thanks everyone. The guards are amazed. It's the first time he's thanked them himself in a long time. They begin to chatter as the captain leads GH to his father. How could such an idiot become so grateful? Insoup says that they've seen Jin Young's changes for themselves now. Red says he's just become a different person. At this time, the vice captain takes GG to his father's house. Then Han Yap looks at him and smiles warmly. It's like Jin Young is their ally instead of their enemy. They walk into the palace. It's only by the shadows that you can tell who is in Jin Young's body. Already inside the building, Han Yap says he notified his father of his visit, but at the same moment, someone comes in behind them. Not believing his eyes, he puts his hand on Dan's shoulder and calls HG Lazy Jin. In front of us is his younger brother Jia Young, the third son of the Yonha trade group. Dan is silent, and Jae Young looks at his face and says he's a different person. Even finally able to look angry and fierce. Grown up? He squeezes his shoulder. Han Yap notices that apparently he's going to be beaten again, just like the last family reunions. To prevent conflict, the captain takes the GG's brother's hand and engages in conversation. They haven't seen each other for a long time, so they are happy to meet. Jae Young slaps his face, asking who let him touch him, and Dan watches in shock. Joss says he can barely handle that worthless, no-good Jin, and now the captain is going to act the same way? No way! He asks, maybe he should teach his brother and the captain a lesson so they never look down on him again. Suddenly, Dan runs his hand over his cheek and calls out to his brother, and then slaps him so hard, he spits blood and falls backwards, as stunned. Han Yap is at a loss for words. Ja Young is furious and asks what he's doing. Dan replies that he was glad and looking forward to meeting him on the way here, and squeezes his shoulder as hard as he did, maybe even harder. Ja Young yells at the top of his voice, calling him a crazy bastard. Dan smiles and says he doesn't fit that title. Ja Young should call him Big Brother. In another section of the manor, sometime later, a man walking down the hallway notices the guards talking noisily outside his father's room. The man is the second son in the family and the group's head of security, named Lee Hua Young. Hua Young inquires about the cause of the commotion, and Hanyup explains to him that there was a conflict between the brothers. The guy realizes that the cause of the disagreement was Ja Young, who is pestering his older brother again. Hua cries out why no one has intervened given Big Brother Jin's fragile condition. Instantly, he heads over to the place, where Ya's screams and Dan's demands for Dan to stop yelling can be heard at the door of his father's room. Dan turns and greets his other brother. When he arrives, he is embarrassed, as he didn't expect his older brother to be able to fight back. Then everyone moves to the next room. Jae Young continues to listen to his older brother's reproaches. Hua stares at them in surprise. Hua Young explains that when he heard about Dan's return, Yi decided to come check on him, and then he was very surprised to see him. Dan promises that he's fine, and noticing his wounded arm, he wonders if Ja Young caused it. Hua assures him that the wound is minor, but Dan raises his hand sharply in front of his younger brother and slaps his brother, causing his nose to bleed. The older man reminds his brothers not to threaten them with a sword unless they want to be slapped. Finally, the relationship between the two is back to normal. Ja Young is very shocked. He didn't expect to be hit so hard, especially considering Jin's previous helplessness. Hua Young is pleased that the older man has taken control of the situation, but wonders what happened at the manor since Dan is acting like a different person now. Gigi says he has a very sharp eye. The elder's gaze falls on a scroll on the table, and he wonders what its purpose is. Hua Young explains that he has a list of participants in front of him to deliver to the assembly hall tomorrow. Flipping through the scroll, Dan expresses a desire to study the composition of the people. Somewhere in here. Earlier, he had intended to find out who had nominated Gong Sun. However, there was no need for that now. He found what he was looking for. The preparation was personally provided by that bastard, Yang Hu. Next, Dan rolls up the scroll and addresses the brothers. He insists that everyone in this room who works with the Yang clan must come up and report this. The brothers are at a loss. Hua Young is in a panic and wonders if the eldest is seriously suggesting such a thing. Jae Young also takes such assumptions to be ridiculous. He claims that he would rather die than let outsiders infringe on their clan. After all, their father put a great deal of effort into raising them alone. Listening to this, Dan is relieved that he won't have to kill them. He then asks if all the senior members of the clan will show up for tomorrow's council and receives a positive answer. He promises that he will attend the meeting. As he leaves, the brothers inquire about his future plans, and he tells them that he is going to see his father. When he leaves, Hua remains puzzled about the events at the manor. Ja Young exclaims indignantly that he should have gone to Mount Juwa. At his father's quarters, he is told of his elder's return, whereupon he orders him to be let in. Upon entering, Dan looks at the bed, and Sonmin's father looks up at him. Father wonders the reason for the noise in the hallway, to which Dan replies that it's nothing serious. Sitting down next to him, Dan says he heard about his illness due to stress, and Sonmin confesses that he's been stressed all his life, but now he can't. His father brings his hand up to his cheek and notes that Jin Young has changed for the better, but it's like his face looks different. Is he really Jin Young? It doesn't matter anymore. His father's happy to see him anyway. Dan agrees with Sungmin, but feels strange. He explains that he grew up without parents and doesn't know what it feels like to have a father. But in Jin's memories, it's different. He remembers his father as a strong, great, and very important man. And though the memories continue to love him despite the trials, something's different now. For some reason, he seems so small to him now. To appease his father, Dan promises to eliminate the sources of his anxiety. He takes on this task so that Sonmin can finally live a stress-free life. Father clarifies, "What do you mean eliminate?" And Dan, with a grim smile, tells him not to worry about anything, which makes Sungmin anxious. The next day, all those gathered take their seats at the council. The Ouyang clan's martial master, Ouyang Hu, that bastard, appears at the door of the hall. The men accompanying him look at each other. Upon hearing the presence of the eldest son, Lee Jin-young, everyone present is startled by the eldest's return and turns their attention to him. Ouyang Hu starts to chuckle, suggesting that Dan is worried about his influence in the clan and the group. A little while later, the second son declares that if there are no objections, he will move on to the main issue. Young-hoo raises his hand and expresses his willingness to speak up. To his knowledge, no one has been guarding young Master Jin since his return, and he suggests that a guard be appointed. Several people present questioned whether Hu had overstepped his bounds. After all, Yongha already has enough of his henchmen. Suddenly, there was the sound of a glass falling, broken by a toothpick, and Hu excuses himself that his hand shook. He hastily apologizes to those around him. Young-hoo asks, "Does anyone want to say anything against it?" The guards fall silent. The mustachioed man stares into the hall, waiting for a reaction. Apparently, no one will object. However, he is prevented from finishing his words by Dan. Dan states that there is a complaint, comes forward and says he has a proposal. He points his finger at the mustachioed man and suggests that Young-hoo be removed as head of security. Things get heated. The allies don't believe it, and Hu's henchmen laugh, thinking it's a terrible joke. Young-hoo laughs back right in Geeg's face, wondering if Jin Young is serious about firing him. He notes that the guy was bedridden and wonders if the senior even has a say. Dan chuckles in response, clarifying if he really thinks so. He then pulls his arm back and delivers a solid punch to Young-hoo. The blow starts a massive explosion, scattering debris in all directions. When the smoke and dust clears, Young-hoo remains dazed, and Dan reminds him that he has forgotten the true owner of the power because of his petty influence. The power over the Yana trading group has passed into Dan's hands after all. A couple hours before the meeting, Hwa-young asks if Gigi is really going to fire Hu, warning that he's out of their league. Dan stops and asks Hwa if he knows what happens to someone who underestimates a Jong-hu warrior. The one who makes such an assumption is devoured. He tells him to look at the state of their group and says they're being devoured right now. Look who's walking the streets. Hwa-young agrees and wonders when the Uyang clan has swelled to such proportions. Dan reassures him. His older brother will take care of it. He'll take care of it himself. Back to the present, Hwa-young is nervous. He's shocked to see exactly how his older brother has decided to handle this problem. Hu's soldiers bare their swords and yell at Jin, standing near the point of impact. Huey's dumbfounded, wondering what the GH wants and if the GH has lost his mind. Hanyup wonders if they're eager for death, nudging their blades against the first young master. The boys prepare for a brutal battle of red fighters against blue merchants. Dan notices that Hanyup is right, and that Young is really too bold. He gets angry and asks what they're doing bringing out weapons against their master. He mutters that those do wish themselves dead, but since he feels sorry for Hu, he'll count it as compensation. To which Hu asks what he's sorry for. Dan says for ruining his plans for a peaceful old age and retirement. After all, it was Hu sent Gongsun to kill him and caused a fight between the brothers, which eventually led to father's illness. If he had only bent one of his sons over, he could have taken over the whole clan without lifting a finger. Hu laughs, calling it pure delusion. Dan steps forward and says it all went wrong when Gongsun, who was meant to kill him, fell by his hand. That's when fate determined who was worthy to live. Hu asks if he was serious about killing Gongsun. Dan assures him that there's no problem. One blow and he was sent to the other world. He adds that if someone wants to devour the trade group, they should have worked harder because now they'll demand reparations. Hu, in a rage, begins to prepare his attack. Dan smiles, for his enemy has been caught red-handed. And Hu leaps up to shout that Jin clearly has a death wish. Dan clenches his fist and meets the palm of Hu's hand, sending a blast across the room. Hu's soldiers barely manage to stay on their feet. Hu was amazed by the lightning energy and the fact that the loser has martial arts skills. Hu steps aside, barely able to stay on his feet. His men are also shocked at his skill. How could he block that punch? Dan asks if it's okay to punch someone who has barely recovered from his illness. He immediately adds that he doesn't mind if it's an official fight. Hu throws himself at him, calling him a cocky chicken who just learned to fly, but shouts that the Uyang clan demands a duel, and with Dan's consent, it will be held. Hu smiles and asks if that's enough. Dan raises his hands and says no. It has to be a duel to the death, so decides Dan. Hu notices that he seems to have gone to a solid school. In such a short time, his skills have become impressive. But there's one thing: he still lacks experience, and Hu is about to make him feel it. Dan easily dodges the attack, leaving Hu confused. Dan begins to charge his fist and declares that he doesn't need someone to explain experience to him. He punches Hu right in the stomach, creating a shockwave and sending him high into the air. He spits up blood and marvels at his strength. Dan says he's about to show the difference in experience. On the takeoff, he shortens the distance using the enlightened art of movement. He flies face to face and brings his arm up for a punch, which Hu manages to parry. But his body still moved a couple meters from the force of the blow. They regain their balance and exchange blows, moving around the room. But Hu is always on the defense. Each blow is hard for him. He notices that he's not fighting a novice, but an experienced martial artist. He clutches his blade, purple flames light up around him, and he whispers, "No, it can't be." His men are excitedly awaiting the fatal blow that will kill Jin, and Hu declares that he won't lose. His art is the three-form sword. Hu calls Dan a mere mediocrity to whom he cannot lose. Dan uses a swift step and instantly shortens the distance. Hu doesn't realize how close he's gotten, and Dan is already waving his fist in the air, saying goodbye to the bastard. He hits him in the chin with a brutal uppercut. It was a tremendous blow. Hu even flew outside right through the roof. Everyone, including his brother, another brother, and even the sick father stare at the hole in the ceiling, amazed by the sight. Even the attending physician asks, "What's going on here?" Seungmin folds his hands and says that apparently his son has mastered martial arts. And in the end, the martial arts master was defeated by the first young master. Back to the fight, Hu falls to the ground in front of Dan. He looks at him, and slowly blood flows from Hu's mouth. His men run to him and call for the leader. They take him in their arms and accost Jin, then raise their heads to Dan, and he asks if they want to die too. Huey's no longer giving signs of life. One of the men says they recognize the integrity of Jin's duel victory, but if the Ouyang clan continues to demand retribution with duels, they won't be able to dodge and will likely lose. Dan replies that he didn't expect to live without hate. If he's given Dorbo, he'll retaliate. And if there's evil and hatred, you can't expect anything else from him. And the responsibility for that will be on him alone, not Young Ha's trade group. Hua Young says it's too dangerous. Dan reminds him what he's already said. The trade group belongs to him, but it also belongs to his father, the guards who keep him safe, and the maids who feed him and respect him. He will not allow his group to be bullied. If they don't understand, let them go to hell. They're all fired. Insop looks ready to cry with happiness and pride. Hu's men are furious, but they leave anyway, wishing him luck. After the massacre, everyone gathers around their leader, Lee Jin-young, and wait for his words. Insop begins to tremble and crying compliments to Jin, but one of the men covers his mouth. He says they should be ashamed of themselves for just standing around being his guards. Dan calls Hua Young over to his place and asks him to bring some elixirs. He says he'll take charge, so he can take as much elixir as he needs. Hua Young promises to make the best quality tonic he can find, since he'll be busy taking care of the elixirs and hiring new guards. The scene changes. Dan says he's already thought of a few candidates for guards. Suddenly, we see a person asking if they're sure it was Lee Jin-young. The scene changes and we go back a few days. That very first day of Lee Jin-young's work at the Yonghua Trading Group. That's when Dan notices something and asks Han-yop if he's eaten at all. He says no, he's been working since dawn. Poor hard worker. Dan says he thought so, and now he decides to elaborate. He lowers his gaze and sees Hu's men laughing and munching in the courtyard. It annoys him that some don't have time to eat because of work, and others are lazy during working hours. They must think they can live off other people's money, and he intends to weed them all out. He breaks the fence because of his rage. But there's a bigger problem. Pieces of the fence are falling down. He needs to find those to take their places in security. But suddenly an idea comes to him and he realizes one thing. He realizes that here they all are inside this building. Inside is a casino, a place where many people gamble for money. And there they are. And it's very smoky in here. Someone recognizes him and says he's a total wuss when Dan goes inside. But still they know it's the same Jin Young from Youngha's trade group. He looks around, and the people around him joke that they thought he was dead since they haven't seen him. But they're sure he's going to blow all his money here. He heads to a private room, where it's so cool and serious that the entrance is guarded. The guard notices him, and jokes about how long it's been since he's been back to blow his money here. Dan replies that he should shut up, or he'll make pork fat out of him. The GH tells him to open the door. The pig takes offense, but Dan enters anyway. His shoe tapping gets everyone's attention, especially the man across the hall and a couple of his minions. He says he's finally here, and he's looking better, so the recovery time must have done him some good. That's Poison Fox Cho Myung-ho, the guy with the scar on his face. He has two bald twin bodyguards, Yuk Jinbo and Yuk Myungbo. Myungho says that since it's been a while, the bald twins should be greeted properly. They apologize, and Myungho reminds them that he's their friend and they should show more concern. Dan sits down and remarks that they've been friends since childhood, but things weren't so good. But adds that this friendship has been accompanied by one-sided violence and constant financial exploitation. He sits down and says that the word friendship apparently evokes different meanings for all people. Myungho offers to have fun after a long break. He must be itching to play, so here's the money. In fact, Myungho is itching to suck the money out of him and play with it. He promises to buy him something big, but seeing Dan's silence, he gets annoyed. Dan replies that he's busy thinking. Myungho wonders what exactly he's thinking about, and GH is thinking about whether to kill him or not. He doesn't want Myungho, he wants the twins. They're probably living with him as bandits and are too valuable to just rot under a bastard's wing. Dan says the decision's been made, and Myungho asks if he's ignoring him. Dan demands to hand over the key to the vault first thing. Myungho stares at him for a second, then asks, if it's just for the money, why does he need the key? Dan answers in the affirmative. He'll take all the cash. He starts talking about the extortion amounts and what he's owed. He says that in fairness it should be 100,000 coins. Myungho looks at it, then chuckles a little, and then bursts into loud laughter. He calls him a humorist and asks the twins if they heard that too. Jean must have studied math. He stands up, laughs, and says Jean must be crazy. After all, the vault is full of jewels. But there's just one thing. There's nothing in there that Jin Young can take, as his best friend aggressively makes him realize. If he needs money, he can borrow it, and asks why the key is so sudden. Dan sits there silent, and Myungho wonders why he's been ignoring him all this time. This pisses him off. GH acts like a frail man after an illness, and now she's glaring at him and demanding money. He tells him to pull himself together and reminds him who he is. Dan is still silent. Myungho sighs. He asks what's wrong with him and starts snapping his fingers in front of his face. Does the GH really want to die? The bandit orders the twins to beat the hell out of him so he won't move on the ground. Those come up and grab him, pawing at him. Dan gets up and says they must not be serious. This greatly surprises one of the twins. He takes hold of the twin and says he was only trying to show kindness to his friend. But since it didn't work out, GH grabs one by the arm and starts squeezing it. Then he throws him across the room, and he hits the door so hard he breaks it. The other one throws a punch from above, but Dan dodges it easily. He puts his hands on the floor and kicks the dumb bald monster in the legs. The blow shatters the bone in his leg. Wish he hadn't been crippled. He grinds his teeth in pain and falls flat on the ground. Dan looks at the twins and remarks that it's a pretty amazing picture. He gets up, and the twins approach him again. He says it's quite a sight. Both of them have broken bones, but they get up immediately, and there isn't an ounce of fear in their eyes at all. He smiles broadly. They are the real deal. They scream and lunge at him at the same time, but Dan dodges. He says it's time to call it a day and disappears before their eyes. They're dumbfounded and don't realize where he's gone, and he's standing right behind them. He puts his palms on their bald heads and tells them they are too valuable. Dan can't leave them to serve such a mediocre man, so he smashes their heads against each other and orders them to stay put because he won't warn them twice. And now only Myungho is left. He's sweating and nervously says he's screwed. Dan smiles and replies that now only his dear friend is left. The bandit yells, outraged that Dan hid studying martial arts instead of math during his recovery. Dan turns to Minho, surprised at his unexpected slowness to respond in this situation. But the guy has already pulled a knife out of his pocket. At least he has some advantage. He asks to come closer, but Dan suggests that his opponent calmly discuss the situation instead of continuing the fight. Minho sighs, expressing annoyance. He realizes that he has nothing to fear. The attacker realizes that Jin Young is an easy target. He runs and shouts furiously that victory is for whoever strikes first. But something stops him. Some object appeared right in front of his face. It was a huge slab that Dan launched at him. After that, Gigi was preparing to hit him with his energy. And after punching through that slab, his fist went straight for the bastard's head. But he puts his hand on his head. Dan declares that victory is always by counterstrike, turning the enemy's words against him. GH smiles and says that the man in front of him is just a fool. So he gives Minho a real electric chair, launching lightning bolts through his palm into the guy's head. The man behind the door is terrified, and sure enough, someone is bound to die during this frenzied brawl. The torture is almost over, and we see Minho's exhausted face. GH lets go of his head and he falls. Now the picture is even better, with three bodies lying on the floor of the private room. Dan sits down and demands him to come to his senses. But Minho is still shaking and coughing. He tries to get up and starts laughing and coughing. Minho responds. He calmly asks Jin Young what the man really needs. The stunned guy wonders what exactly Jin Young did during his recovery, looking at his incredible strength. Maybe he devoted his recovery period to stealth training instead of resting? Myung-ho ponders if revenge is the reason for Jin's actions, trying to remember if he was so bad to him. Realizing the possible revenge, Myung-ho screams in rage, accusing Dan of a pre-planned massacre. The frightened Myung-ho, addressing Dan as a friend, offers anything instead of the keys to calm the man down. Myung-ho frantically reminisces about their childhood friendship, trying to justify past grievances and persuade Dan. Desperately insisting on their close friendship, Myung-ho tries to find common ground with GH. Myung-ho, deciding that friendship will save him, is relieved that the decision is correct. Guy interrupts Myung-ho's feigned apology in disgust, demanding that he let him go immediately. In a panic, Myung-ho elevates their relationship to the level of brotherhood, trying to avoid Dan's wrath at all costs. Myung-ho orders the twins to welcome Dan as their new big brother, trying to solidify their status. And they do so. Myung-ho remembers the true nature of their past relationship, where Myung-ho humiliated him, made him lick his shoes, and swindled him out of money. Myung-ho makes a plan to run away with the twins at the first opportunity, not believing in the new brotherhood. He's sure that with the twins, he'll easily find a new place of employment and a source of income after his escape. The twins confirm Myung-ho's order, treating Dan like a big brother, showing obedience. Dan seriously asks Myung-ho if he's ready for the lifelong commitment that the title of named brother carries. Myung-ho, noticing his doubt, reminds him of his new status, and the twins vow to serve Dan as their older brother. Dan approvingly accepts the twins' oath, pleased with their willingness to serve him faithfully. Ordering the twins out, Dan declares the need to identify the older brother, since they are now named brothers. He informs Myung-ho that they will decide on the seniority and announce the result later. A stunned Myung-ho tries to stop what's happening by yelling, "Wait a second!" But he's ignored. The twins walk away. They're left alone. Myung-ho is at a loss to ask what's going on and what Dan is trying to accomplish. A sudden realization hits Myung-ho. Dan's goal wasn't money at all, but something else. Dan bluntly accuses Myung-ho of shamelessly exploiting gullible people for profit, condemning such behavior. He declares his intention to rectify the situation by taking the twins into his custody to raise them properly. With a stifled sigh, Myung-ho desperately suggests that Dan just take the money and call it a day. Myung-ho indignantly yells that after beating him up, Dan will take the twins as well, depriving him of everything. In a panic, he says that he's condemning him to death, so let him just kill him right there. Dan sarcastically contemplates killing the guy in front of him. And then he says, "Okay, let's go," and delivers a low kick to Minho's jaw. This surprised him. Blood spurted from his mouth. Dan thanks Myung-ho for his years of hard work, emphasizing the hypocrisy of their friendship, and bestows him with multiple hard punches. Myung-ho takes all the blows and can't fight back. During the beating, he begins to realize something. Myung-ho is horrified to realize that Dan is really ready to follow through and kill him. In a strangled whisper, Myung-ho tries to suggest something to Dan, barely able to pronounce the words. Dan defiantly interjects without hearing the whisper, forcing Myung-ho to repeat himself louder. Sobbing, the bandit blurts out an offer to give up the key in exchange for his life, receiving a sarcastic response. Myung-ho asks in confusion how to address Dan now that their status as friends has changed, but GH immediately takes it and throws it at the wall of the building, punching the wall through. The twins see their brother and ask how he is, and Dan rubs his hands together. Minho himself thinks Dan's actions are insane because what he's given out today is just horrible. The twins ask Myung-ho if he really lost the fight and lost to Dan, looking at his condition. Myung-ho bitterly confirms defeat. He announces to the twins that Dan is their big brother from now on. Myung-ho feels unbearable humiliation, ready to burst into tears after the defeat. He ponders that the twins would be better off in Yun-ha's solid trading group than in his underground casino. Myung-ho nostalgically recalls the years alongside the twins. Believing in their bond, he silently thanks them. But they just walk away. Anger overwhelms Myung-ho. He mentally insults the bald, ungrateful traitors. Myung-ho recalls the old man's warning not to trust the black-haired men, recognizing their rightness now. A passerby recognizes the ragged man as the long-disappeared Cheo Myung-ho, struck by his pathetic appearance. Another passerby confirms that it's Cheo Myung-ho. He wonders where his faithful twins have gone. The bandits, noticing the twins' absence, decide that they can now easily take down the weakened Myung-ho. The bandit approaches one of the casino patrons. He smiles and sighs. Myung-ho, seeing his enemies surrounding him, menacingly reminds them of his reputation as the poison fox, trying to intimidate them. He defiantly challenges the attackers, offering to approach them if they dare, despite his condition. One of the bandits contemptuously calls Myung-ho a walking corpse, resenting his continued insolence. Someone in the crowd shouts an order to kill Myung-ho, signaling the start of the brutal massacre of him. Myung-ho realizes that this attack could indeed be fatal to him, and curses his fate. He mentally addresses Dan, blaming him for his death and calling him the ultimate traitor. Suddenly, a large explosion after the impact scatters all the bastards across the room. Myung-ho sees his savior. Dan stands and notes the meanness of the bandits attacking Myung-ho, only now that he's helpless and alone. GH orders them to collect anything of value from the defeated Myung-ho. Myung-ho comments skeptically on the robber Dan's actions, calling them ostentatious in a cruel world. He barely waddles to the exit, while two bald heads stare after him. The scene has changed, it's daytime. One of the twins addresses Dan, using the title Big Brother, waiting for his instructions. The twin thanks Dan for helping Myung-ho in that fight, and the other twin also thanks him for helping their past master. Then they set to work again and leave while Dan stands silent. Dan wonders the question that has troubled many visitors to the underground casino. Why were the formidable twins serving Myung-ho? Some thought they were purchased slaves. Others suggested that the twins were merely afraid of Myung-ho and had no loyalty to him. The narrator admits that he himself held one of these popular opinions. But the truth was different. Neither slavery nor fear explained the twins' loyalty. Dan smiles and thinks about the difficulty he has in understanding this, even in his second life. He accepts the difficulty of recognizing other people's intentions, especially in the story of the twins and their master. Someone is standing outside the door at this time watching them. He is shocked and can't believe his eyes. He looks at the guy in front of him and can't realize. Is it really Lee Jin-young?